Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now I recently purchased a grade C Alienware gaming laptop from CEX. By their own definition, a grade C item is working but in poor condition, so I wasn't expecting much. Old Alienwares still seem to carry a slight premium over other similar spec devices, and at £120 I'm surprised this one was still in stock. It was labelled as a Dell P39G on the website, so perhaps it flew under the radar. Either that, or I was the only one silly enough to look at the specs and think, yeah, that's worth buying in 2024. My second, possibly third, fourth or fifth hand Alienware arrived quickly and well packaged with the original power brick and charge cable. I've owned a handful of Alienware laptops and desktops in the past, and I have to say that this is possibly one of the tidiest examples. Sure, there are a few marks and scratches and some weird splattering on the screen, which I'll be sure to clean off, but there are no splits, cracks or noticeable points of damage. The keyboard and mousepad are barely worn, and even the usual weird sort of sticky rubbery texture around said keyboard and mousepad is in respectable condition. This is the M14X, which according to the plate at the bottom was deployed in mid-2014. This chunky chap really isn't bad considering it's nearing 10 years old. I absolutely love the size and styling of these old beasts. It still has an awesome on-desk presence in my opinion. I've been using this one for a few days at the time of video upload, and I'm pleased to report that it still holds a decent charge. I got a couple of hours from it in balanced mode, but battery life will depend on what you're doing, of course. Furthermore, this is now running Windows 10, which had been fully reset before it got to me. Originally it would have had Windows 8, but I'm pleased to report that it doesn't anymore, and I was able to install all the necessary drivers, including the Alienware Command Center, which allows us to enable and customize the various lighting effects. Speaking of drivers, this brings us on to the graphics support and specs. This machine has a GTX 765M, which no longer receives updates, as well as an i5 42M CPU. Those familiar with desktop hardware would be forgiven for thinking that this is a quad-core part, but as a mobile chip it has just 2 cores with hyper-threading, which will certainly help. Along with this we have 8 gigs of 1600 MHz DDR3 in dual channel configuration thankfully, as well as a 500GB SSHD, which is faster than a standard HDD but not as snappy as a regular SSD. Still, this was advertised as having a standard hard drive, so I can't complain. Now then, it's time to try out some games and see what this aging Alienware can do, if anything. Alright, so first up here we have Baldur's Gate 3. Now the GTX 765M won't support any later iterations of FSR or Fidelity FX Super Resolution, but this uses FSR 1 as well, so we can enable that and get slightly better performance. The trouble is FSR 1 can make things look like a blurry mess if you turn the preset up too high, so we stuck with the quality mode here for at least 30 FPS in Baldur's Gate 3. You can see here that the GPU was the limiting factor, but there were times when the CPU spiked to 95-100% usage, and it still seems to be reaching its maximum all-core frequency, which is nice, despite the increasing temperature. Luckily that's not high enough whereby we're seeing any throttling. Now of course Cyberpunk 2077 uses a newer iteration of FSR, and enabling it means that we just see a black screen like we do on the 700 series desktop Nvidia card. So this is out of the question here, we'll have to turn FSR off completely. We will remain with the rest of the settings set to low. Now luckily the Alienware M14X has a 1366x768 native screen resolution, and this screen is also a 60Hz display, so luckily for us, with these weaker and older specs, it's not too troublesome in some games, but certain titles like Cyberpunk here, even running at this lower resolution, are still too much for this aging hardware. Now luckily as well, 1366x768 on a native display doesn't look as bad as say when you're using a 1080p display and you have to turn things down, but yeah, that's worth bearing in mind. Cyberpunk is absolutely decimating our 42M and 765M graphics, so yes, not exactly what I would call playable here on this hardware. Now, of course, I just had to try the original Crysis, the 2007 release. Once again, our CPU is sitting over 80 degrees. I'm not too concerned with these temperatures. The laptop doesn't sound too loud either. Here you can see the 765M is doing most of the work and hitting its maximum clock speed. At high settings though, our frame rate overall is pretty good, though there will be the odd stutter and frame dip, as to be expected from Crysis. I don't know what I was thinking, running CS2 seems to be a lot more demanding than CSGO. We could have used FSR 1.0 here, but it doesn't really help because I think the CPU is primarily the limiting factor. In fact, it didn't help because I did enable FSR 1 and it didn't do anything to help performance. So yeah, the more we play, the sort of more the frame rate will drop. Overall, we're sitting at somewhere between 30 and 50 FPS. It's up to you whether or not you'd call this playable. Personally, I think the performance is too inconsistent to be playable, especially when a lot of the players here are a lot better than me and I need all the help I can get. Yeah, this is a bit of a tough one for the Alienware to run, but at least it does run, and I'm sure you could turn the resolution down even lower if you wanted to try and bump up that frame rate. Forza Horizon 5 gave us a warning because the drivers are outdated. The mouse cursor sort of looked like it was loading something. That little spinny thing came up and then it crashed to desktop. Now luckily for us, Fortnite has a built-in performance mode which allows us to go lower than low in terms of the visuals. We actually set all the available options to their respective lowest settings as well, and we were running at 100% 3D resolution, so this is full 1366 by 768 for what that's worth. Now of course Fortnite can be troublesome to dual-core CPUs. I remember a while ago that the textures used to have issues actually loading in at all and there'd be all sorts of graphical glitches, but here on the i5-42M it seems to be running just fine. There are no graphical problems, though it's clear to see from our on-screen statistics that the CPU is holding our GPU back. I'll have to see if at some point I can upgrade this. This doesn't stop me from being a sort of decent Fortnite player, I guess. I seem to be pretty good at Fortnite despite being terrible at every other online shooter, but performance is sitting at least 60 FPS, so that's nice to see. Now I imagined Grand Theft Auto 5 will be a lot worse than this because when I've run it on other 2-core CPUs I've seen missing textures, all sorts. In busier areas it will put our CPU through its paces. 99-100% usage on screen right now. Not ideal. The temperature again sitting at around 80 degrees. There's no throttling going on. The same can be said for the GPU, which of course in this case is being underutilized because the CPU is holding us back. But all in all, the performance is actually okay here, and GTA 5 is definitely more than playable. So it should be though, I mean it's certainly getting on in age now. Red Dead Redemption 2 looks lovely. Talking of missing textures, this one had a bit of a problem. We're running at the lowest settings here, which we're pretty much limited to. I could have adjusted things in the INI file, perhaps set the textures to ultra, but it would have been pointless because our frame rate as it is, even at this lower resolution, is pretty subpar. There were a couple of inconsistencies with the frame time as well, a couple of little stutters, but overall the average isn't exactly going to be brilliant. So yeah, I'm glad that it runs, and I'm quite surprised that it actually did run, but is it playable? I wouldn't say so. Finally then, we have The Witcher 3. This is the next-gen version of the game. Now, I'm not actually sure how many of the next-gen effects we actually get because I'm running it in DX11 mode. We certainly don't get access to ray tracing and all that, but we wouldn't anyway. No upscaling options available here, but we can't use them because, you know, we just get a black screen anyway, so it's better to run it in DX11 mode. There will be some dips and drops below 30 FPS. I guess it's sort of playable, but for the most part it's going to be a pretty inconsistent experience. I think the biggest surprises of the day were Baldur's Gate 3 and I'm going to say Cyberpunk. Despite how bad it sort of did run, I'm surprised it actually started at all. So yeah, especially since the CPU has just 2 cores and 4 threads and the GTX 765M is pretty ancient and unsupported these days. But it's always nice to pick up these finds from sites like CEX and cache converters sometimes too. These are my sort of favourite videos to make, and I enjoyed testing this hardware. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. So thank you as always. Let me know what you think of this Alienware down below in the comments, and hopefully then I'll see all of you in the next one.